3 million years ago, something intelligent was walking across Africa. But it wasn't human. It didn't have a human brain, yet it left behind something remarkable. Tool marks on animal bones, dating back over 3 million years, 800,000 years before our first ancestors even emerged. So if intelligence existed even before humans, what does that mean for how we view our history? Hi guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Michael. I have a degree in ancient history, and on this channel, we discuss the unexplainable mysteries of our past. Let's get into it. We've always been told that the first early flickers of intelligence emerged with the first human ancestors, around 2.6 million years ago. They had the ability to make and use tools, and that's what separated them from everything that came before. But recent discoveries have meant that this story has been falling apart more and more. In August 2010, an international team led by Dr. Zerensenay Alemseged published findings in Nature that challenged everything we thought we knew about human intelligence. They were working in Dakika, Ethiopia, in the lower Awash Valley, and they found 2 fossilized bones bearing unmistakable evidence of stone tool use. The first specimen was a rib fragment from a cow-sized mammal, the second a femur shaft from a goat-sized animal. But both bones showed distinctive markings confirmed through microscopic analysis. The research team's conclusion was startling but unambiguous. They showed stone tool cut marks for flesh removal and percussion marks for marrow access. The dating comes from volcanic deposits in the Dakika area, the same deposits used to date the famous juvenile specimen Selam, Lucy's baby, and correlated with deposits at Hadar where Lucy herself was discovered. But the age was a major shock, because the bones fell between 3.31 and 3.35 million years ago, an incredibly old date. Now, the discovery was, of course, challenged. In 2010, Spanish anthropologist Manuel Dominguez Rodrigo argued the marks could have been caused by animal trampling rather than butchery. And look, that's a fair question. When you're dealing with bones or fossils that are that old, you have to rule out every natural explanation. Trampling can create marks, so can sediment pressure, so can erosion. But the original research team came back with detailed analysis. The most critical marks showed deep, V-shaped cross-sections, exactly what you'd get from a stone blade cutting through meat. The marks were straight, not curved like what trampling produces, and they appeared in patterns that only make sense if someone or something was deliberately using tools, cutting along the bone. Thus, since 2015, the paleoanthropological community has accepted the tool use interpretation. Something was making tools 3.5 million years ago. However, that of course created a new problem. We know the only human ancestor known from Dakika at this time period was Australopithecus afarensis, or Lucy's species, and they had relatively small brains. So the old story that Homo, or early humans, invented intelligence cannot be right, and new discoveries kept shattering this old idea. 5 years later, in May 2015, a research team published findings that are just as mind-blowing. Working in West Turkana, Kenya, archaeologist Sonia Harmond and her team discovered 150 stone tools at a site named Lomekwi 3. They found large stone cores with flaking surfaces, hammerstones with impact marks, and heavy, flat-faced blocks used for striking. The evidence was clear. The tools showed deliberate manufacturing. Some were made by holding a stone and striking it against a stationary rock on the ground, rotating it as sharp pieces came off. Others were made by placing a stone on a flat surface and hitting it from above with another rock. The paper explicitly states that the Lomekwi knappers possessed a, quote, developing understanding of stone's fracture properties. In other words, they knew which stones would work, they understood exactly where to strike, and they could maintain a working edge through repeated blows. And these tools were around 3.3 million years old, which means they were almost certainly made by Australopithecus or Kenyanthropus, not by our genus. So that raises a profound question. If Homo didn't invent toolmaking, then where did intelligence actually come from? For a long time, we've assumed that the key is in the size of our brains. Bigger brain, more neurons, more processing power, more intelligence. Simple, right? Well, here's the problem. Australopithecus afarensis had brains measuring 400 to 500 cubic centimeters. That's the same size as a modern chimpanzee's brain. For comparison, early Homo species, the ones we've always credited with inventing tools, had brains around 600 to 700 cubic centimeters, and modern humans have brains averaging 1,350 cubic centimeters, more than twice the size of Australopithecus. You could fit 2.5 Lucy brains inside a modern human skull. On top of this, scientific research shows that creating and using stone tools involves multiple complex cognitive processes working together. For example, the toolmaker must understand how different types of stones will break. They need precise coordination between vision and hand movement, and they need at least some understanding of three-dimensional stone geometry. But Australopithecus breaks that logic completely. Even though they had ape-sized brains, they were selecting appropriate stones, understanding fracture mechanics, executing precise strikes at calculated angles, and potentially using sharp edges to butcher animal carcasses. Every framework we've built to understand human intelligence says that this shouldn't be possible, and yet it was. In 2020, a study examining fossil skull impressions from Australopithecus found something else remarkable. These hominins had protracted brain growth like humans do today, despite having ape-sized brains. That meant long childhoods, giving them extended periods for learning. The lead researcher, our friend Dr. JRayZimmer Alamaseged, stated, quote, "As early as 3 million years ago, children had a long dependence on caregivers. That gave children more time to acquire cognitive and social skills." Thus, we are starting to see a pattern of underestimating ancient intelligence. But this trend isn't unique to just our most ancient ancestors. No, it repeats throughout our evolutionary history. Look at Neanderthals. For decades, they were portrayed as intellectually inferior to Homo sapiens. Brutish, primitive, outcompeted by smarter humans. That's the story we told ourselves. That we won because we were smarter. That they disappeared because they just couldn't keep up. We even named ourselves Homo sapiens, meaning wise man, in a grossly arrogant flex. But the evidence tells a completely different story. Neanderthals were smart. They were using medicinal plants. They were burying their dead, repetitively marking cave walls, painting them, and creating pigment mixes in shells. They built mysterious stone circles underground 176,000 years ago. They built boats and sailed across the Mediterranean 130,000 years ago. They had symbolic behavior, which means they were intelligent enough to create meaning. Yet, they went extinct only around 40,000 years ago. Not because they were stupid, probably because of something else, like climate, competition, or just bad luck. And this tells us something important. The narrative that intelligence equals survival is quite likely wrong. Intelligence is ancient, it appeared in multiple lineages, and we've systematically underestimated every species that isn't us. So why does this keep happening? Well, let's look at what we actually found at Dakika and Lomekwi. These stone cores, flakes, and hammerstones are all relatively simple looking artifacts, and if you only had these objects, you might think early hominins had basic, primitive technology. But when we're talking about a period so far in the past, there could be more to it than meets the eye. Today, modern human hunter-gatherer tribes overwhelmingly prefer plant-based materials, twigs, bark, vine, and leaves, whereas stone and bone are relatively rare exceptions. Yet, when we look at the archaeological record for early hominins, we see almost exclusively stone tools. That ratio seems backwards, doesn't it? Well, here's why. Wood rots. In temperate climates, wooden tools decay within a few years to a few decades. Plant fibers decompose in months. Leather and hides disappear through bacterial action. Baskets, ropes, woven materials, everything, these will all disappear very quickly unless they're preserved in a desert or they get frozen. On the other hand, stone is nearly indestructible. That's why we get these discoveries, where a 3.3 million year old stone tool can be recovered intact. Think about the Schöningen spears from Germany. That find included 10 complete wooden spears, dated to approximately 300,000 years ago. Aside from proving the intelligence of early humans, these only survived because the site was waterlogged, creating the perfect conditions that stopped decomposition. However, if those spears had been in normal soil, they'd be gone. We'd only see the stone tools from that site, and maybe come to the conclusion that those people had crude technology. But the actual evidence shows sophisticated wooden weaponry with aerodynamic design, hunters who selected specific wood species, manufacturing skill involving cutting, scraping, and smoothing. And it's the same thing with boats. We know humans reached Australia 65,000 years ago, at least, and that required watercraft capable of crossing 50 plus kilometers of open ocean. So those boats had to have existed, but there's no archaeological evidence of them. There's also strong evidence that humans built boats and reached Sulawesi, another island, over 1 million years ago. Yet no boats survive. In fact, the oldest surviving boat in the world is only around 10,000 years old. Everything before that is gone.
Which raises the question, if stone tools appeared 3.3 million years ago, possibly older, with ape-sized brains, and most of their actual technology is almost certainly invisible in the archaeological record, how did this intelligence develop in the first place?
Well, the answer could be in something called gene-culture coevolution. Think of it like this. Creating stone tools requires learning. You can't instinctively know how to strike a stone at the right angle with the right force. You have to be taught. You have to practice. You're gathering that knowledge over years and years and years. That means hominins who could learn more effectively had an advantage. They survived better. They had more offspring. Over generations, natural selection favored those with better learning abilities. It also favored the better teachers, the people who could share knowledge with the next generation more effectively. Thus, better teaching enabled more complex tools. More complex tools created stronger selection pressure for even better teaching. It's a loop that just reinforces itself. Researchers have tested this experimentally. When modern humans learned older ones' stone tool making without teaching or language, transmission was really bad, which basically meant their skills degraded with each generation. But when they threw in proper teaching, transmission improved dramatically. Add language to the mix and the whole thing becomes a lot more reliable.
So what does that tell us? Well, the researchers concluded that stone tool making created evolutionary pressure. The more complex the tools, the stronger the pressure for better teaching and communication. And from 3.3 million years ago all the way to the present, this feedback loop was running. And not just in Homo, but in pre-Homo lineages that we've dismissed as primitive. So let's be clear about what that actually means.
To make stone tools, these hominins had to understand cause and effect. They had to picture how a stone would break before they struck it. They had to hold a goal in mind, a sharp edge, and work through the steps to get there. That's not instinct, it's proper thinking. And if they could think through stone breaking, they could think through everything else. Plant knowledge, which roots are safe, which will kill you unless you process them first, when different plants fruit, and where to find them as seasons change. That information takes generations to build, and it only survives if you teach it. Or fire, how to keep flames alive overnight, which wood burns hot and which just smokes, how you carry fire from place to place, when you use it for cooking compared to warmth, or keeping predators away. That's all technical knowledge, transmitted through culture. Then there are social structures, who hunts with who, how to divide labor, how to resolve conflicts, who teaches the children, and how relationships span extended families. Even teaching itself, understanding that someone else doesn't know what you know, recognizing their ignorance and deliberately helping them fix it. That's the kind of social cognition and perspective taking that likely began emerging by 3 million years ago.
All of it evolved over millions of years in species that we've dismissed as primitive. Intelligence is incredibly ancient, yet we've dismissed it. Why? Well, because stone is all that has survived.
We've been drawing conclusions from maybe 1%, if that, of what actually existed. Partly, that's because the entire archaeological record is biased towards the stuff that doesn't rot. But regardless, one thing is clear. Intelligence didn't suddenly appear with Homo. We've been thinking, experimenting, and adapting for at least 3.4 million years, almost a million years longer than we're comfortable admitting, which means the question isn't just when did humans get smart, because we've been smart for an incredibly long time. The question is, what did we achieve in those invisible millions of years that left no trace at all?
Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing to my channel down below. I'll see you next time.